This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. This is Rebecca Smith-Aldridge, Executive Director here at the Mid-Hudson Library System. Thank you for joining us for this webinar this morning. What we're going to be doing is taking a look at the State Aid for Library Construction Program and how your library can apply for funds through that program in the coming year. This is a state program that has a number of regulations related to it and a fair amount of paperwork. So if you haven't been through this process before, the chance you have here today is to get in on the ground floor to really understand how this program works and who oversees the program and how Mid-Hudson can support you through the program if you would like to apply this year. We will also have technical assistance throughout the next few months for those of you who decide to apply this year. So we won't get into the nitty-gritty of how you fill out the forms and how you use the online portal today, but we are going to give you an overview of what to expect, what you should have in place, how much it actually kind of costs to apply for this grant, and what the timeline looks like. As Kirsten mentioned in the pregame here before we turned on the recording this morning, we will have time for questions. So you could pop them into the chat box as you think of them, or hold them till the end and we'll unmute everyone so we can chat together. The group is small enough that we can do that today. So if you have any technical problems during it, please use the chat box. Kirsten is on the other end and she can help troubleshoot things for you. But we're just going to get going. And like I said, chat box is your friend during the first portion of this, and we'll unmute everyone for Q&A. So the State Aid for Public Library Construction Program is a state program. Imagine that, since it's called the State Aid for Public Library Construction Program. It's actually money that's allocated in the budget bill each year, but it's not actual money in the budget. It's bonded money through the Dormitory Authority of New York State, which means we have basically 3 agencies involved in this program. It starts at the state level with the Dormitory Authority. It's administered by the Division of Library Development or the New York State Library, and then they task each of the 23 public library systems in New York State to help with the administration of this. So when you say to yourself, oh, Mid-Hudson said it has to be this, or Mid-Hudson told me this, we are really just agents of the state carrying out a program that's designed at the state level. So there's very little control Mid-Hudson has over many of the issues that might be challenging to you. They are things that you will find in regulation, and that's what's cited there. NYCRR Title 8 Education 90.12. If you want to get really nitty gritty, what we've done is really simplified that regulation for you in terms of this workshop this morning to make sure you understand the finer points of it in a way that maybe doesn't make your eyes cross. So as many of you are quite aware, in the state budget this year, there's $14 million available statewide. This is a considerable reduction from the amount that was available last year. It's a 60% reduction. There was $34 million available last year. Hopefully everyone saw the message this morning that there's a new capital bill being discussed in Albany that has the potential to put that money back in, but of course that's an unknown as of this morning as we're talking together. So right now we know that Mid-Hudson will have at least $525,545 to allocate to the libraries that apply this year. So one of the questions we get all the time is, how much money can I expect to get? Well, it's hard for us to answer that question for you because there's so many variables. We don't know how many libraries will apply, and we don't know how much money they will be asking for. But all former grants that have been given out through this program are available for you to see. We can point you to that. It's actually listed on our website, and we'll point that out to you a little later this morning. So you can see the size grants that libraries have received for different types of projects. So we can point you to that information, but we can't necessarily predict how much you will get this year if you were to apply. Something to keep in mind right away is that there is a minimum grant award through this program. Because it's a matching grant, and in the regulation, the standard match needs to be at least 50%. Your minimum grant award is $2,500. So when you think about what size project is appropriate to apply for through this program, that's one of your first limiters, that your total project cost must be at least $5,000. And of course, we're going to talk more today about what are eligible costs under the program. But also, I think the more you learn about the program and the more you hear about how much work is involved in this, very small projects you might find aren't a great fit for this program, but everyone's financial situation is different, so we do not preclude you from applying for small, medium, and large size projects through this program. And you're gonna have plenty of opportunity to vet your ideas with us and ask if what we think about, what you wanna do, is it eligible, does it meet the regulations? We can help guide you through all those types of questions. So this is the first part of the program that I think is not intuitive for you. So we're going to unpack this a little bit for you. If you read the State Library's website about this grant program, it notes the grant program period is July 1st of this year through June 30th of 2022. And that might seem strange since the application doesn't come out until July and you don't find out if you get the money until 2020. So a couple things to keep in mind about the grant program period. We're going to go over this in detail. Is there are some things that you can't spend money before certain dates, and you certainly need to finish your project by this date that you see here, June 30th, 2022. But as I noted, you will not see the application come out from the state until June, and it won't be due until Mid-Hudson until August 2nd. So this July 1st date is kind of misleading in a little bit, but by law, this is the grant program period, and we'll talk a bit this morning about how these dates fit into the planning that you'll do for your application and when you start your project and when you actually receive money through this program to underwrite your project. These are things that might not seem as logical as you might hope. So we just wanted to review the timeline with you. This is unpacking that grant program, the grant timeline a little bit more for you. We overlay a couple of deadlines here at Mid-Hudson to help manage this program. So all the directors at this point have received the construction needs intent to apply memo. This is a required step for all libraries who would like to apply this year. It's actually a step encouraged for all libraries in the system so we can help assess construction needs when we're doing advocacy to justify the need for all of the money that comes through this program to our system. But it is mandatory for anyone who wants to apply this year. We need to know if you're thinking of applying. The memo itself helps you understand some of the things you'll need to have in place in time to apply, because once that application opens, you want to be all ready to go. It might seem far away, but there's a number of things that we'll point out to you today that have timelines that aren't necessarily in your control. So the sooner you start working on things, if you'd like to apply this year, the less stress you're going to have and the more likely you're going to be able to hit the deadline. So as I mentioned, in early June, you'll see an announcement that the online application is available from the state library. And we'll point out to you how you get registered for that and how you can jump right in and get started on that. We will also offer a technical assistance workshop at Mid-Hudson. So if you've never done this before, you may want to save that date. What we'll do is walk you through step by step every question in the application and every form that you have to fill out and upload into the program, the online application program, which there are a considerable number of forms that you have to fill out. It is a state grant program. It is fairly involved in terms of the paperwork you have to fill out, but I would say do yourself a favor, earmark that date on your calendar, because we can make your life a lot easier by helping you walk through all that stuff the first time. So throughout June, July, and August, you have plenty of access to technical assistance through Mid-Hudson. In addition to the workshop, you'll have access to support by phone, online, and in person with what we call office hours, and we'll share those dates with you towards the end of the webinar. So again, Mid-Hudson is here to help you access this money. While our board administers this grant program, Mid-Hudson staff is here to support you and guide you through the process. So please don't feel you're by yourself. You've got help from people who have been through this process a number of times, and like I said, I think can make your life a bit easier. So August 2nd will be when the grant application is due. And this might sound early to you, but there's a lot of steps that happen after grants come in. So the Mid-Hudson board is tasked by the state to make recommendations for grant award amounts. And this is where there's a complication for us, because we have, every year I've worked on this grant program, which is close to 17 years now, we've had more requests for money than we have money to give out. So this process means that we have to do a significant vetting of each application to make sure everyone meets the eligibility requirements and is speaking to the priorities that have been set by the Mid-Hudson board. So we're going to talk to you about the priorities, make sure you understand them, and how to write your grant narratives in a way that makes your application as attractive as possible, since it's a competitive grant program. So between August 2nd and September 18th, there is processing of your grant applications, and the Mid-Hudson Incentives Committee is ranking your application applications. Our board is committed to getting as much of this money into the hands of as many of our member libraries as possible. So they do their best to make sure every library who's eligible gets money through this program. It often is not as much as you wish it would be. It might not be the 50% amount that you could get through the program. It could be less, but as I said, the board is committed to trying to help as many libraries as they can through this process. So once they make their recommendations to the full Mid-Hudson board, they vote on it in September at their September 18th meeting, whether or not to accept those recommendations and forward them on to the state library. Now at that point, Mid-Hudson staff would be in contact with you about your application to let you know how much the award amount is and ask you if you would like to proceed knowing that amount. If it comes in considerably less than you were hoping for and you have trouble matching that money, you have the right to withdraw at that point. Or you can say, you know what, every little bit helps. We've got plenty to match it. Let's keep going with this. Then we'll ask you to make possibly some few fixes to your grant. We have two very serious reviews beyond Mid-Hudson. Both the state library then reviews your application and the dormitory authority lawyers review your application. And trust me, they are nitpicky. So we have some tips and strategies for you to help minimize getting your application snagged through that process that we can help you out with. But that's a pretty tight timeline between when the Mid-Hudson board makes the recommendation and when we have to provide those finished applications with our recommendations up to the Division of Library Development. So we sometimes ask you to do some of the fixes before we get there. When we're really confident you're going to be getting an award, we know that you're going to be moving forward to the next stage and you're very confident about your cash flow situation, you might be asked to do some fixes before then, but we have to keep that October 1st deadline in mind because that needs to get up to the state for review. One of the kind of things that's elongating the notification process is the fact that we have much more money than we used to have through this program. Many years ago, there was only $800,000 for the whole state, and now there's $14 million for the whole state, which as you can imagine, means far more applications for the state to process. So what their job is, once we pass them along, is they have to vet every single application from every library in New York State before it can be moved on to the dorm authority. And the dormitory authority has to review every single application from every single library in New York State before they make any notifications to any library. So after we provide it to the state in October 1st, you don't actually get official notice that our award recommendation for you has been approved until summertime next year. So this is almost a year, it is a year-long process from the date you open up that online application to when you actually get official notification from the state library that you've been successful and that your award amount has been approved. Usually it's pretty quick, I will say, once you get notified from the state when the money actually arrives, and you will get 90% of that award paid out to the library pretty quickly after the formal notification arrives. June, July 2020 would be the best guess of when you'd find out. That's not a guarantee. It has been as late as August, depending on what kind of issues arise during the review processes. But again, once you find out that you've received the grant, you get the cash in hand pretty quickly. Now you'll notice that's 90%, not 100%. The last 10% is held until you file your final paperwork. So once you've completed the project, which again could be out until June 30th, 2022, then you file a final report, provide photos proving that you did the work, clean up any budget issues that you might have with the state. Then they release the last 10% of your award amount to you at that point. So we're going to revisit the timeline a little later, and I will say to you, we are going to make sure you get all of these slides, and as you know, this is being recorded, so you'll have this to refer back to, and you can always ask us questions about this along the way. But as we mentioned, step one is the action memo. And now part one, every library, even if you're not going to apply, is asked to fill out. We're asking for your top 3 projects and about how much you think those might cost. And we'd like to see your board approved facility plan. And this is one of the first prerequisites of this grant program, that you have a board approved facility plan. Over the years, what we've learned is libraries that kind of off the top of their head apply for this grant quickly get into trouble. Either they don't have the cash flow available to match the program, or they haven't actually gotten vendor quotes and are kind of not clear on how much it's really going to cost to do the work. So we do ask that you have a board approved facility plan, and that what you choose to apply for this year is obviously in that board approved facility plan and prioritized for a specific specific reason. This is not something we ask for willy-nilly. This is something that helps protect your library and the grant program. We cannot have libraries applying for this grant who default on the grant. These need to be projects that you know you're going to do and that you know you can complete and that you have the financial wherewithal to complete. So the more forethought and planning the board sees towards the project you apply for, the better your chances are in this grant program. So the second part of the action memo is actually a checklist to help you understand what's eligible, what you need to have in place by when, to really help you assess, is this the right year for you to go for that grant program? And it's okay to change your mind later. You might say, yeah, I've got everything in place here, and then conditions on the ground change and you can't quite get it done this year. That's fine, no problem. Just, you're not applying that year, just let us know. Or you might say, no, we're not going to apply this year, and you send in your memo to Casey, and then maybe a month from now something changes and you get a windfall of cash. An angel donor comes in and gives you money, and you're like, wow, we could actually finally do this capital project we'd always wanted to do. Give us a call, we'll get you on the list. This is really just to help us understand who's going to apply this year and how we can best support them and get you ready for what is to come. Because as we said, it's not the kind of thing you can procrastinate about until the last minute and expect to be successful. And I know none of you would ever do that anyway, but you never know. So this is a competitive grant program, as we mentioned. That means there's requests for more money than we have to give out. So making sure you've done a nice job on your narratives. We're going to point out to you what our board is looking at when they make their decisions about the amounts to provide to each library. And there's just, honestly, we give you all the answers to the test of how to be successful in this. So when applications come in where it's obvious people have not followed the instructions and haven't been listening to the advice that's been available, it makes it harder for the board to give you the money that you need to do your project. So I would say do yourself a favor and read the best practices and listen to the tips we have to give you to make sure you're successful in this program and minimize the amount of back and forth we have to have over time. So I'm going to point out along the way a lot of things you might need access to or links to get to. We've crafted a website, an actual web page on our website, which you see the link to there at hudson.org/NYS construction grant / and there you're going to see a lot of the things we talk about today. You'll be able to click on a link and get your login information for the online grant portal. You'll be able to get right to the information about the State Historic Preservation Program. You'll see documentation related to a lot of the things we talk about this morning. So again, don't feel like you frantically have to write down everything. We've done our best to document that and make sure it's easily accessible to you. So I wanted to review with you what's eligible under the grant program and what is ineligible. And just a reminder, this is not like Mid-Hudson is choosing what's eligible and ineligible. This is directly from the Commissioner's regulations in Title 8 Education Section 90.12, which these are all quoted right from that. So we've gotten some pushback in years past where directors have said, oh, well, Mid-Hudson won't let me do this or Mid-Hudson won't let me do that. Trust me, it is not Mid-Hudson. We're just doing our best to help you be successful along the guidelines we find in the regulation, which is what your grant will be judged against by the state, both at the state library and by the dormitory authority. So in terms of eligible costs, it's pretty wide open, to be honest with you. Site acquisition, if you've got a really big project on the horizon, you need to purchase land or an existing building to be used for the library, that is very clearly an eligible cost. And new construction is very cleanly an eligible cost. There's no doubt about it. You're gonna build a whole brand new library building, go for it. This is the grant program for you. If you need to do a big expansion on your building, again, absolutely appropriate. You can actually break a new construction project into multiple phases and apply for multiple grants in consecutive years. So you could do one grant for demolition and site preparation, and the next year you could do initial construction. The third year you could do bathrooms, fixtures, and furnishing. So if you have a really big project, you'll want to speak to us early on to figure out how we can maximize your ability to apply for money through the grant program. Also eligible are many renovations and rehabilitation costs. Now I'm going to preface this section with something that I hope you will all actually make a note of, that things that would be classified as routine maintenance are not eligible. So when we talk about renovation and rehabilitation, it really does need to speak to one of these items that you see cited here. So you can see here issues related to the installation of energy conservation and renewable energy, very clearly eligible. Replacement of roofs, windows, and doors are eligible as long as they have an energy conservation component, and we'll talk far more about that in a few minutes. If you need to reconstruct existing space, so if in your library it's not ideally formatted for your current library service delivery program, you can knock down walls, build new spaces within your existing outer shell. Very obviously eligible, but again, that's construction or reconstruction of existing space. This is not rearranging furniture and getting new carpet. This is actual construction. Of course, anything to do with making your facility more accessible is something our board is looking for, the state is looking for. Those are projects that we're always very happy to see come through. Installation of elevators, also related to accessibility, obviously. When you have new electrical, plumbing, lighting, and HVAC, that's something you can work into construction projects and is an eligible cost. And if you need new driveways, sidewalks, and parking lots, this is something related to accessibility, and we can give you a couple tips about how to frame that in the point earning area of accessibility to help you out with that. Now, a caveat on that last one, you see the underlined item. You can use this funding for furniture, equipment, and shelving. That could be tables, chairs, new stacks, computers even, but only if it's tied to new or newly constructed space. So there has to be construction happening along with the purchase of furniture, equipment, and shelving. It couldn't be a standalone project just for furniture, equipment, and shelving. And that sometimes is challenging for libraries when that's really what they need, or they've done a phased project and they're out of construction projects. They just actually need the stuff to put inside the library. Just always remember, you have to tie that request with actual construction in the same year in your application. So also eligible, these things are newer to the list of things that are eligible. So if you had taken a look at this program a long time ago and you thought this stuff wasn't eligible, that's very possible. But we have been able to advocate for upgrades to the regulation over the past few years, which has made these things eligible as well, which you can see why, right? Emergency generators, a big issue in our area, lots of concerns about extended power outages and where people will go to stay connected if they're telecommuting or having a warm place to stay. And libraries can be critical community centers in the face of those types of situations. So standalone applications for emergency generators is now eligible. Outdoor signage, so if you wanted one of those electrified signs out front so you didn't have to stop putting the letters in every Monday morning to change what program's coming on. The Marlboro Library is a great example of someone who used this grant program to get new outdoor signage on a heavily trafficked road for their library. So something I know a number of libraries are interested in. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, active listening devices and systems for the deaf and hearing impaired are required for public spaces. So that's something that they've lifted out and made very obvious that you can apply for as a standalone project or integrated with renovation of your meeting space or an addition to your library that's going to include meeting space that you'd like to also have that type of technology embedded in your project. And again, very helpful. Now you can also get reimbursed for construction management of your project. So for those of you who've been through big projects before, you'll know that when you're doing a major expansion, renovation, or new construction project, having a construction manager or owner's rep who can be the liaison between you and your construction firm or your different multiple contractors who are working on the project, that can save you tons of time and money. So it's money well spent through this grant program. And another very new addition is if you wanted to bring fiber directly to your building to increase your ability to offer broadband to your patrons and beyond, that is also an eligible cost. They're always very excited to see projects that come in that include that. Now, the newest thing that's been added is you can now have your architectural and engineering plans for projects rolled into your total project cost through this grant program. So one of the things you need to keep in mind, though, is that it has to be the fees that actually are for projects that are really going to happen. So it can't be for what they call speculative plans. So this is often a first step libraries go through. They're thinking about what are our options. Let's call an architect, have them come in and assess our space. We'll see if they, think we have enough room in the back to go out and build a new meeting space or not, or maybe do a whole renovation. And then the board gets that information, sits on it for a while, is thinking about it, and maybe or maybe doesn't act on it. That would be considered speculative architectural or engineering plans. But if you've received those plans, you've chosen what you're going to do, you can go out to bid for it. There's commitment from the board to underwrite that new building program that you want to do. Then you could roll in your architectural and engineering fees into a grant application that would be tied to construction. So again, couldn't be standalone project for construction. It has to be part of a construction project that you are applying for. So the not eligible list we mentioned earlier, routine maintenance, and this has gotten a number of libraries very frustrated because there's not a clear definition of routine maintenance. But there are things I think you could probably imagine if you're painting the outside of the building, or you are, again, new carpeting in the building. Things that don't require construction are things that are really about maintaining the building and making sure it's up to snuff every few years. Those are the types of things they would expect to see you saving money in your capital fund for. So if you're thinking some aspect of your project might inch towards routine maintenance, or you're not sure, just ask us. We can help you figure out how to make that judgment and how to use language around the activities you want to do in the program to make sure they don't raise any red flags for the reviewers at the state level. So we talked in detail about speculative architectural fees not being eligible. Also speculative building consultant study. So if you, again, hired a space planner to come in and do a proposal for you, that would not be eligible. That actually wouldn't even be eligible once you applied for the grant to carry out the work that the consultant may be recommending. So a good thing to keep in mind. Obviously, no interest or carrying charges on bonds can be included, or mortgage payments, and no books or library materials can be purchased with the grant funds at this point. And oddly, landscaping is not eligible under the program. So you couldn't do a standalone grant application to re-landscape the front of the library unless perhaps some of that work was tied to making your site more accessible. So if you were redoing the driveway and walkways into the library, which resulted in things having to be removed or replanted or relocated, there's a potential for some of that landscaping work to be rolled in, but it's something that you'd need to be cautious about. It might raise a red flag for the state. So again, something that if it's part of your project, let us know. We can talk it through and see what we can do to help you get reimbursed for as much of your project as possible, but keeping these things in mind as you move forward would be important. But again, don't always assume some of those things might not be eligible, but do know that it could raise a red flag if it gets ultimately included without some advice from Mid-Hudson staff. So we just reviewed what is eligible. So all of those things are eligible, but not equally. If you think about how we make decisions when there's limited amounts of funds to give out, there has to be a way to prioritize those grants that are coming in. So what the Mid-Hudson Board has done is created a structure, or a rubric, if you will, to judge applications that come in, to make sure they're well thought out, that they have the financial backing that they need, that they're reaching what we call our funding priorities. So there's one here that we already talked about, that you've got to be part of a board-approved prioritized facility plan, which you've filed with us through the action memo process. And then we're looking that your project provides for at least one of the following, and we'll explain each of these for you. That whatever project you're going to work on at least provides an increase in access to services, provides an increase in accessibility to your building and to different service points that you might not have offered in the past. It increases your energy conservation, which therefore reduces your operating costs as part of a disaster recovery effort, which we'll define for you in a sec, or you're actually being a leader in the area of sustainable design and taking that extra thoughtful step to build buildings that are healthier and more energy conservation and are longer lasting in the long run. And again, we'll explain what we mean by that. So the first two actually I think are pretty self-explanatory, but I just want to make sure we're really clear. Increase in services, right? So if you expand your square footage, there's obviously an increase in the available services that you have in your building. Increase in access could be anything from making your facility more accessible to someone with a disability, to creating new space in your library that never existed before. A great example might be a teen services room to reach a population that you've never been able to reach before. So again, if maybe you didn't increase your square footage, but you increased a service point, you switched that up and created a new service point, that could also fall into the increase in access point you can earn through this program. Now, energy conservation is something we wanted to talk a little more with you about this morning, because you can't just say it's going to be more energy efficient. We need to see evidence of that, and there's a couple of things you can do to prove that. One is that you've had an energy audit, and we've qualified that. And this might sound highly technical, but trust me, anytime you contact a firm that does energy audits and you use this language, a level 2 ASHRAE energy audit, they're going to know exactly what you're talking about. So having an energy audit been done and following through on recommendations in that audit might be a way for you to earn that energy conservation point. Also, you'd want to be sure that any products you're purchasing related to your window, doors, roof are actually Energy Star rated. This goes for HVAC equipment also. So if you're not familiar with Energy Star, we've got a handout on the Mid-Hudson Construction Grant page. It's called the Useful Life Energy Conservation Standards, which itemizes what you should be looking for and what you should advise your contractor you're looking for anything that you're hoping to get money for that would be related to energy conservation. Now, new this year, if your library is participating in the Sustainable Library Certification Program, you're automatically going to get the energy conservation point for a project related. So we know that many of you might not be familiar with this program. We wanted to point out that one of the points you earn in the Sustainable Library Certification Program is having an energy audit done. So it's something you're required to do through that program. So we're just doing some cross-pollination here and incentivizing people to join that program if that's a good fit for your library. So the disaster recovery point, disaster is not just a disaster because it makes you stressed out. Disaster is a disaster with this kind of definition, that you've got substantial loss of access to library services due to a low probability, high consequence event. So this means something that you couldn't have planned for that meant it decreased access to your library. So a great example is the Putnam Valley Library, when their library facility was compromised by flooding due to Hurricane Irene back in 2012. It actually shifted the foundation of their building and was actually getting a part of their building close to falling into a creek. So they had an unsafe environment for people to access the library, and they had to cut off access to the library for a little while. Obviously, another example might be the Phoenicia Library or the Pleasant Valley Library, who has suffered from a fire. Low probability, but high consequence, right? That actually cut off access to the library facility. So if you're applying for something in this category, chances are we are, not only by your side, but have been pushing you to apply for this grant. So we're helping you with this. But just to note that if this is your situation and your grant narrative, you have to adequately describe what kind of warning did you have about the disaster? What was the magnitude of the disaster? Did it result in 6 months of no access to the library, or even 6 weeks of no access to the library? And how long, right, was it impacting that service? So you could say, hey, we got into a temporary space, but it means we now don't have enough room for programming, or we still don't have enough computers to meet the needs of our community because we're in a smaller space. That's the type of thing the board is looking for. Just a little funny aside, we had a library who gave us a call. They were very upset. Their boiler had died in the middle of a very cold winter, and they were classifying it as a disaster. And so we asked a few questions about that program, that project that they had, and it turned out that the boiler was actually over 100 years old. It was original to the building, and the library board had not been putting adequate money aside for the eventual replacement of that item. And as most people know, if you're a homeowner, there's systems in your home that will eventually fail that you save up for over time to make sure you have the money to replace them when the end of the useful life of that piece of equipment comes around. So that would not be considered a disaster. That would be considered inadequate financial planning in terms of this grant program. So something to keep in mind, how we define a disaster. It's again, low probability, high consequence event. So leadership and sustainable design, we're looking for third-party verification of design of facilities. So if you're doing a major renovation, expansion, or new construction, and we're using any of these 5 programs to guide your design and decision making, and you're enrolled in these programs, you would get an additional point, which would again weight your application a bit higher than others, which again could result in more funding for your project than someone who earned only maybe 1 point in this program. So if you'd like to learn more about this, there's a recorded on-demand webinar through the Mid-Hudson website about sustainable design that explains what these programs are, and it's something that would be very hard to retroactively apply to your decision making. So it's something to think about very early on when you're first talking to an architect about your goals for your project and how you want things carried out. And I'll just give away one of the big findings of the sustainable design webinar that you can watch on the website. It is an absolute fallacy that sustainable design has to cost more. If you do it right and you integrate it early enough into your goal set and you hire architects and engineers and builders who understand how to do this work, it should cost the same or less as traditional construction. So I do encourage you to learn more about that if you're not that familiar with these programs. So again, to be successful, you have to cross-reference what's eligible and what those funding priorities are for Mid-Hudson. So as you can see, the funding priorities are extremely broad. We've done our best to make priorities that almost anyone could fall into, but the more of those you hit, the more points you earn. So therefore, the more money we can recommend for your project. So I mentioned earlier on that this is a matching fund program, meaning that you have to have matching funds to receive this grant. So you have to basically have money to get money through this program, which is challenging for many libraries in our system. We understand that. But again, this is the way the state program is constructed, and this is what we have to follow. So up to 50% of the total project costs could be awarded to you through this program. Again, completely dependent on how many applications we get and how much money is requested through that program. So there is a very high likelihood that you would get less than 50% of your total project cost. And we would be asking you, could you still accept this grant if you were to get less than that? So something to think about ahead of time, and we can talk more about that if that's the issue you're concerned about. Now, there's a temporary law in place right now that allows for your library to get more than a 50% match, up to 75%, if you meet the criteria for what is defined as an economically disadvantaged community. And that definition is available on our website, but I just wanted to put it in front of you so you had a sense of what we're talking about. If your community has 15% or more of the population living in poverty, or you have your library's in a school district where the percentage of those enrolled in the National School Lunch Program is 40% or more, or if you have a combination of the two of those things but at lower levels, 10% or more of the population in poverty and school lunch program enrollment at 30% or more, you're eligible for that reduced match option. So that again is something that you'd want to have proof of. You'd print out information from the census and from the National School Lunch Program. We can show you where to find that data. You'd include a narrative about that in your impact statement, pointing out that you fit this criteria, and that then gives you a higher percentage of money through that program, less of which you have to match through the program. So just another reminder, and I really hate harping on this, but the truth is there's far more need in our system than there is money to go around. So if you have concerns about cash flow, or you think the only way you can do this project is if you get exactly 50% through this program, that I'm going to throw a caution flag up on your project and just make sure we have a conversation about that before you apply, so you have a sense of reality of what those grant amounts normally look like, given the volume of requests that come through here in the Mid-Hudson Library System. So again, just to review the grant program period, July 1 through June 30th of 2022. This is another little unexpected thing you might not have thought about, but because the grant program begins on July 1st, only expenditures made after July 1st of this year are eligible for reimbursement under this program. So if you've already started a project, That does not mean you can't apply for it, but expenditures made between the 1st of this year and June 30th could only be counted towards your match, which is a good thing, right? Because that means you've already expended some money on the project prior to the start date of the grant program, but you could still get credit for that through your matching funds. You could not only say, hey, we've got this amount in our capital fund to put towards this project, but we also spent $10,000 to get this project off the ground, which would count towards your match to bridge that difference between the recommended award amount and your total project cost. Now, if you happen to spend some money last summer on a project that you want to apply for this year, that would not come into play in the regulations around this grant program. So no expenditures made prior to January 1st of this year could be included in your total project costs or counted towards your match. So just reviewing our timeline of where we are. So in this process, right, the construction needs memo is out and in your hands and due at the end of May. So you've got plenty of time, we hope, to get that together. Online application coming out in June, technical assistance workshop from Hudson in June, and you're working towards a deadline of August 2nd. And I'm gonna just pause right there and move forward so you keep that date in mind. August 2nd is when everything is due. And I will guarantee you there is no extension on that deadline. So here at Mid-Hudson, we always bend over backwards to help you out when you're running late on something or something got in the way of you getting something in on time. This is one of those deadlines we cannot budge on because of everything that has to happen after your application comes in. So again, you might see some seriousness from Rebecca and Casey that you're not used to seeing when you're like, hey, I just couldn't get that one thing done. Is that okay? We're going to have to say no, and that's not something we're happy about either. So again, all the more reason to be paying attention now for what's required. So this font is very tiny because there's many things on this list. You'll have a lot of things that have to be uploaded to an online grant portal. So when people say, what does the application look like? There's an application form that asks you basic information about your library, when it was built, do you own it or not? Is it fully accessible under ADA? Then you're going to have to write narratives that include a number of components, an abstract, description, an impact statement, and I underlined and bolded impact statement because that's what our board reads to evaluate your project and assign it the points under their funding priority list. Timetable and a budget narrative. And again, if you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what that might look like, how long would those things be? That's why you might want to come to the technical assistance workshop in June 27th. We can coach you on that. We can show you examples of those types of things and give you a better sense of what we're looking for. You're going to have a contractor quote that's on the contractor's letterhead. So it can't be handwritten on a back of an envelope. It can't be from your architect. It has to be from a contractor. Now, you're not locked into using that contractor if you're not going to start the project right away. If you just want to get a couple bids, see what the fair price is, put that in your application, and then you're not going out to bid for another 6 to 9 months, that's okay. You don't have to use the same contractor, but you're going to want to be confident that contractor quote is within the realm of reality. And so we can chat about that if that's something you're struggling with. You're gonna have to prove you actually have funds to finance the project. It might be a bank statement or a letter from your treasurer. We can give you examples of what that could look like. You have to show where additional funding sources are coming from. Certification of required minimum lease. If you don't own your building, if you lease it, we have 2 or 3 libraries in the system who actually lease their space, they don't own it. In that case, you have to have a proof of your lease of at least 10 years, and you also have to have a project approval from the building owner to guarantee that that work can be done in that facility. If your building's owned by the school district, super rare situation, I can only think of 2 in our system, you actually need a different office at the state level to sign off on that, the Office of Facilities Planning. And my understanding is there's quite a backup at the Office of Facility Planning now. It can take 6 to 9 months to get approval. So if you're not already in that queue, this might not be your year for this grant. SHPO, and I'm sorry I didn't spell out that acronym. I'll have to put a quarter in the acronym jar. That stands for the State Historic Preservation Office. And this is something that if your building is more than 50 years old, you're required to get approval from them. If your building is not 50 years old, but you are going to be doing anything related to ground disturbance, you're going to be tearing up the ground to build something else, that also requires SHPO approval, even if your building is newer than 50 years. So that's something to learn more about sooner rather than later. Plenty of info on that on our website that we pointed out to you. And you can also ask us any questions you might have about it. There's also forms related to environmental impact, something called smart growth, which is elevating projects that are using existing buildings and building in town centers. There's some financial forms with very specific instructions, photographs. If you have started your project already, I hope you took pre or before photographs, because those are required. And there is a board assurances form your board will have to sign off on to prove your whole board is aware that you are applying for this money and are committed to following through with the grant. So that's, again, something time sensitive to get on your board docket if you're going to be applying for this grant this year. So these are things that we would hope very soon that you've already got done or almost done. These are things that are, you're reliant on other people to get you, right? We mentioned the quotes from your contractor. If you need approval from the State Historic Preservation Office, they have 30 days to get back to you. So if you drag your feet on that, you don't get to them to the middle of July, they are not required to meet the Mid-Hudson deadline. They have 30 days to get back to you, which could, something you might want to build into your timeline now in preparation for the grant. If you want to get an energy audit done, again, you want to start working on that now. The New York State Directory Service account, that's the account you need to be able to access the grant portal. And oddly enough, when you apply for it, it's not like any other website where you immediately get your access. It can take 48 hours or longer for them to get back to you with your login information. So again, something you don't want to wait for until the announcement that the portal is open, because that might be frustrating for you. And this is something that most of our libraries don't have an issue with. Most libraries have a New York State vendor ID, but if you're like, I don't even know what that is, that would be something to look into now rather than waiting until when the portal is open. And again, we mentioned the before photos, something to get on sooner rather than later, because if you forget that, it's hard to go back in time, evidently, to get those. So we mentioned this website several times, and again, you can access a lot of the stuff we mentioned you'll want to work on early through this website. So again, midhudson.org/New York State Construction Grant, and Kirsten posted it in the chat box. You can just click on it and go right there today if you wanted to. We'll also have the recording of this webinar there for you after today. So we mentioned technical assistance workshop coming up on Thursday, June 27th. You can sign up for that through the Mid-Hudson calendar. Casey is going to be offering office hours, which you can do by phone through GoToMeeting, or you can come down to Mid-Hudson and bring your grant application with you, and we can sit down and go through that with you and answer any questions you might have. So again, something that you might just want to save the date for on your calendar. Maybe you start and you dive into this process and you look at all the forums and you're like, I got this, I can do it, I don't need any help from Mid-Hudson. And then fine, then you don't need us. But you might get in there and be like, oh my God, what is this FS10 form? I don't know how to fill that out. I wish someone would help me with that. Well, we're here to help you. And not that you can't email us anytime for assistance, but if you'd like some sit down help for 30 minutes or more, these would be dates that we'll make sure we're available to help you do that. And again, Casey will make it known when these dates are and how you sign up for these in a very visible way to make sure you don't miss out on these. So before we open up the floor to questions, I think you've probably already gotten the hint. This is the kind of grant you don't procrastinate about. I know from 20 years of writing grants myself that it's hard to get going in writing grants, and you're like, just leave it to the last minute. I'm sure I can get it done. I can pull it off. But again, it's not completely in your power to pull it off at the last minute. You've got a number of outside influences that you need to work with to get a complete application package together. So again, we'll just reiterate, do yourself a favor. Your future self will thank you for getting some of this stuff rolling now if you're 100% certain you're going to apply this year. If you think this isn't your year or you're not quite sure yet, a couple of those things you might want to get done, and maybe you put some of the other ones on hold, and then you'd be in a great shape for next year. People always ask me, hey, will the money be there next year? And I will say there's been construction grant money every year I've worked here at Mid-Hudson for the past 20 years. How much is always in question, but there's always something. So if you wanted to wait until next year, you could hedge your bets and do that. There's probably going to be money there available. So a lot of this is about timing. Is this the right year for you or not? So we're going to unmute everyone and see if you have questions. And while we're getting that fixed up, and if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that. I just want to point out that Casey Conlon is our new Library Sustainability Coordinator. I know many of you have met him already. Some of you have not, but he's been studying up and studying the regulation and studying our process here at Mid-Hudson. He will be the supervisor of this grant program this year. So initial inquiries about the program and questions you might have after today can go right to Casey. Casey, but that does not mean that I am not still here to help you if that's helpful. And I'm certainly going to be working with Casey this season to make sure you get the information you need. But do not hesitate to contact Casey. He's learned a lot about the program already and is well positioned to help you out. So I'm going to stop talking. We've got some time left for questions and just see what's making you curious at this point. So I think we've got everyone unmuted. So if you'd like to just ask your question, please feel free. If you're shy and want to use the chat box, that's okay too.
Rebecca, it's Mary. How are you?
Good, Mary. How are you?
Good, good. Just digesting all of this. If we don't, okay, if we feel that we're not able to apply this year, and we apply next year, if the dates are always the same, like the cycle is always the same, that July to June, is that the same?
Yeah, it's been pretty consistent from year to year. I
Every
would say
year?
the thing that could throw it off is if the budget gets passed late.
Okay.
That might throw a monkey wrench into things, but it's been pretty consistent for the past decade.
Okay. So if we can't apply this year, but we have projects that we have to do, that we have to get started with, like next year, like early 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are those? I'm just getting confused with the time of what we could add, the projects, the timeline of the projects that we would do, if that we would be eligible to apply for the funding. Like if we've done something, like, can it be retroactive? I know I'm being a little.
No, I understand what you're asking,
I'm
Mary. I
not
just want to
being
get
clear,
back
but
to the slide that I think would help answer the
yeah,
question.
yeah,
So
this is the one that was a little
yep.
confusing.
So if there's work that you need to get started earlier than when you're applying for the grant for it, what you'd want to try to do is to wait until January 1st of 2020 to do that work. And then you'd be able to use any money you expended as part of your matching funds when you apply next year.
I see. Okay, that helps me out a lot. Thank you.
Sure. We've got a few more minutes left, so don't be shy if you've got something. It's also fine to follow up with us afterwards, but I will say if no one else had questions, that would be a record.
I have another question.
All right, Mary, go for it.
Getting back to this other issue that we just talked about. So let's say we have a project and we had to pay for it, was paid for, okay, that we paid for it. And then we apply. So that I can still, even though I paid for it already, if I can still apply for the matching funds?
That's a great question, Mary. Actually, no. If you
okay, that's what I'm getting a little bit.
You can't. So you can't finish a project before the application is due. So this year the application is due August 2nd. Any money you've already expended could not be to complete the project before August 2nd. And I should really add that to the slide. Thank you for asking that question.
Okay,
so it's okay to have spent it. It's okay to have spent the money before it's due and even before the grant comes out, but you cannot have completed the project before the application is due.
I gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Good question, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? All right, well, if not, you guys know where to find us. B, we're going to follow up with an email so you have a contact for Casey and access to the resources we mentioned today. And as always, if you have any questions, just let us know. We're here to help you.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thanks for coming today.
Okay, bye-bye.